Jim was the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing, and I don't mean it in the wolf sense of it, but I sure do mean it in the sheep sense. I mean, he came across as the veritable country lawyer. Aw shucks, and often his hair would be tousled and his clothes would be askew, but he had this brilliant mind, and meanwhile, as he was doing this aw shucks routine, he was just knocking off the points.
He thought very quickly. He got to the problem and to the answer while you were still trying to figure out what the problem was and what the best answer would be.
Jim had a great facility in explaining the law to people and making them feel comfortable with it.
Torys as a firm was the embodiment of Jim Tory, and it was a wonderful place to be. You didn't think about competing with each other. You didn't think about anything other than practicing the best law in the most respectful and collegial way, and that was a wonderful gift, and it was Jim's.
People on the other side of deals ended up loving Jim Tory. I warrant we got most of our business in the firm from Jim Tory through people who had seen him on the other side.
The other thing about Jim is, for all his accomplishments, and my goodness, he had tremendous accomplishments, you never heard him talk about himself and his own accomplishments. He really believed that we were in this together. We worked together for the good of the clients, for the good of each other, and it was never about him. Yet it was all about him. We loved him.
So I said to him, like, Jim, what is the magic sauce? You have the magic sauce. I want the magic sauce. I want to know what your secret is so that I can be that kind of lawyer in my practice. And he just looked at me and said, he had no magic sauce, he had no magic answers. He said something completely humble, as he always did, and something complimentary, I'm sure, because that was his style. So I never extracted from him his magic sauce, but he had magic sauce. He did.
He wasn't one to stand up at a partners meeting and pound the table and say, we are going to do X, we are going to accomplish Y. We are going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread.
We went through some tough times and some tough board meetings where there was quite a lot of acrimony at some times. And having that touch and that ability to deflate a situation, it was a gift. It had a tremendous amount of charm. And he was able to get people who were warring factions, get them close together, get them talking, get them thinking in the right way.
So in 1986, the summer of 1986, I was a second-year partner at Torys, very inexperienced, and Jim got this magnificent retainer from TD Bank. It was a $1 billion unsecured loan to a farm implements company, John Deere. And although I thought Jim was by far the smartest guy I've ever met, I still think that, I really thought we might be out of our league. And we start negotiating, and this Simpson Thatcher lawyer starts to prance on and on about the deals he's done and the unsecured loans he's done, and Jim just sits there calm, cool, collected, and he did what Jim always does. He just asked questions. He said, he'd sit back and say, but if we agree to that, wouldn't that mean that? Or would it be fair that if that happened in that situation? And as the day went on, you could just see the Simpson Thatcher lawyer being worn down, and Jim winning every point we had to win. So the end of the day came, and I sort of wondered what the reaction of the Simpson Thatcher lawyer would be. And he, in a very conspicuous manner, walked over to our side of the table, and in front of everybody shook Jim Tory's hand, and he looked him in the eye and said, "Thanks for the lesson, Professor."
But Jim even dazzled the litigators. In the mid-'80s, we were put in charge in various stages of a matter that Bank of Montreal initially consulted Jim on for a second opinion. We found ourselves, after losing 2 rounds in the BC courts with various BC lawyers, needing to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. At a meeting in winter, the bank said to Jim, what litigator has the best chance of persuading the Supreme Court of Canada? And Jim said it's J.J. Robinette. Now, Robinette was nearing 80 at the time, but he was widely acknowledged as Canada's leading advocate. Even more fortunately, we bumped right into him as he was leaving the office for the day. He was surprised to see Jim, and he said, "What brought you here, Jim?" And Jim looked at him and said, "John, I've got a case that I think you should take. It's an application for leave to the Supreme Court of Canada." And Robinette said, "Yes, I'll take the case." And Jim said, "Don't you even want to know what it's about?" And Robinette said, "No, if you say I should take it, that's good enough for me."
Jim always encouraged you to go out on a limb as long as you knew that you could crawl back to the tree to make sure that you weren't going too far from the core values of the law firm, which he was completely conscious of 24 hours a day.
I think that was Jim's secret. He had this ripple effect. And it wasn't just with people outside the firm. Importantly, it was with people inside the firm. He reinforced all the time these qualities, and then that's the firm's true strength.
Everybody knows that the very best method of government is an enlightened dictatorship. That's why we're so lucky. Jim was the enlightened dictator. A totally amazing man in every way.
When I face a particularly challenging issue or situation, I often find that in the back of my head, something is saying to me, what would Jim do in this situation, or what would Jim do with this issue? And fortunately, I worked with him enough that he speaks to me in those situations.
I didn't know Jim Tory very well, unfortunately, but I had the opportunity to read the eulogies that were delivered at his funeral, and I was really struck by how so many of the values he so strongly embodied are such prevalent values here at the firm. Things like professionalism, loyalty, respect for your colleagues, respect for people on the other side of the table. Those are things that are so embedded in our culture here at Torys and make it such a great place to work.
All this stuff I heard about Jim being the most honorable person that anyone's met, obviously never golfed with him, because Jim never three-putted a green in his life. That's because after the first one, it was good. And this didn't matter whether you were playing for money, it didn't matter whether you were an articling student or the CEO of the best client in town. Jim, put his ball in the hole and put the number on the card that felt best to him. And we always used to have great fun with it. And invariably, he'd smooth the whole thing over at the end by, buying lunch or something.
My most fond memories of Jim Tory were visiting him in Guysborough that my wife and I did on a couple of occasions, just because I saw Jim with his family in his roots, the place he loved the best.
I miss all the laughs I had with him. I mean, even up to the last time that I had a conversation with him on the phone. Which was just a couple of days before he died, and we were having a laugh about various things, to do with him having been out sailing and so forth, and I was talking about that and what a fiasco that must have been. And he would kid you, but you could kid him back. I mean, he could dish it out, but he also could take it.
He believed in working hard when he was in the office, but he said you only had so many good hours of work in you, and you ought to be able to get done what you need to get done in time to get home for dinner and to be with your family, which he always was. When I told my dad I wanted to be a litigation lawyer, and I remember him pausing because, of course, he was a corporate lawyer, and he viewed clients getting into litigation as a sign of failure. So it did take him aback when I said that was something I wanted to do, and he paused and then looked at me and said, "That's fine, but just don't let yourself get used as a hired asshole."
Yeah, as kids it was always torturous when friends would come over and have dinner, or if they would call on the telephone, he would say...
Dad didn't answer the phone very often, but when he did...
Yeah. Oh, is Suzanne there, please? Oh, no, sorry. Can't talk now, she's not here. We just flushed her down the toilet. We're dashing down to Lake Ontario to pull her out of the water. So once we get her, I'll ask her to call you back. And then you'd get on the phone with your friends and say, yeah, that was just Dad, sorry.
He was a constant presence in our lives, but a quiet presence. He let us make our own decisions. He was always there for advice. He was always someone we wanted to do our best for. We wanted him to be proud of us.
He always thought about other people, his colleagues, his clients, his family, how was it going to impact them, and that's what mattered. And I would certainly hope that I've learned from that, and that my kids have learned from that, and would see him as a role model that they'd like to emulate.
He was always teasing the children and pulling their leg, and whenever he had an opportunity to make a little wisecrack or poke fun at them, he would. And I think my husband David really enjoyed having a more in-depth conversation with his father, and not about personal things, but they loved to talk about history and politics and have a bit of a debate.
Mutual trust and respect was not a corporate motto for Jim, it was a way of life. And it is that ethos that drives the firm today.
You know, most people were thinking get the young guys back and pound out the hours and that's how you make money and build a firm. Jim never, ever, ever put money first. He put development of people, development of the core values of the law firm. He always felt if you do what you love, money will follow.
If you met him in the hallways, he spoke to you. He stopped and he spoke to you. And it really didn't matter who he was with. He made a point of introducing you or speaking to you, always asking you about the role that you played, the thing that you did to make the firm successful.
I guess one of the things that I most admired about Jim, aside from his legal talents, was his general egalitarian approach to life and to people.
He treated everyone the same way. Lawyers, staff, adversaries.
Well, I think what Jim was somebody who was more interested in the person, the mind and heart of the person, and with a rigorous ability to judge that, and was practically blind to where you came from, what gender you were, what race you were, or practically anything else, all the things that I guess constitute diversity.
I think the idea of lawyers operating as one-man bands, so to speak, individuals, has passed in the area of sophisticated law that Torys operates in.
It's like someone's a master chef, and we're all little parts of the stew. Some are potatoes, some are the meat, and some are the seasonings, but we need everything to make the final masterpiece. Jim Tory was the master chef. He was the Iron Chef. And I think I might have been a little salt.
Jim Tory was a master at pulling the best out of each person at the firm. And what you see now is the modern Torys. A Torys that's diverse, that's dynamic, future-oriented, constantly renewing and rejuvenating itself.
It's a firm that values people, values its culture, values collaboration.
You have this sense of loyalty that is unwavering, and I've seen it in many of my friends who don't work here anymore but would never have a bad thing to say about the firm, and all have great, very deep loyalty to the firm, and I think the firm has very deep loyalty to them.
And you might think that's a bit odd considering we have 300 lawyers and it's a very big firm, but there's such a team-based collaborative approach to work that gets done here, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that it was two brothers who founded the firm.
So it's not just collaboration between individual members on a particular team, but across departments and across offices in different cities. We get to know each other, so we know where people's specialties are and where their interests are, and so we're able to really rely on that when we run into new problems.
I think you just come in here and you know that people take their work seriously, they take their clients seriously, and they take their integrity seriously, but they don't take themselves seriously. And that was the hallmark of Jim Tory, and I like to think my father as well. I think they were very much alike in that regard. When they were people of immense accomplishment, but they didn't take themselves seriously.
He managed the firm a little bit the way a successful father, a well-loved father, manages his family.
And he was, I've accused him of this to his face, he was a communist about it. He understood this was a collective effort. It wasn't a bunch of stars, although there are terrific lawyers here, but people who all work together. And that was his modeling, that was his approach.
It's actually astounding what he could say and get away with.
And that was a little hard for me to get used to at first, but once I got used to it, you just sort of rolled with it. And you soon learned if he wasn't teasing you, that's when you start to worry, you know.
One morning, ran into him in the hallway, and of course I knew who he was, so I said hello and I introduced myself to him. I said, "Hi, my name is Annika and I'm a summer student here." And he looked at me totally seriously and said, "Are you any good?" And I was totally terrified. There was an assistant walking past who overheard it and just chuckled to herself, and I could tell he was kidding. But I was totally flustered, and I think I said something like, "I'm not really sure."
He would holler down the hallway and say, "Do we have any cash?" And the point of that was, he said that if I was to tell him that there was no cash, that was it, he was done, he was leaving.
Back in the days when the firm was much smaller, and the name of every lawyer was printed on the letterhead, there was one lawyer who was very, very upset because his name was misspelled on the letterhead. And I think he had reason to be upset. So he went in to see Jim, ranting and raving about this misspelling, and Jim treated him very seriously. "Oh, yeah, that's wrong. That's a wrong spelling." He said, "I guess there's nothing for it but that you'll have to change your name."
In addition to building a great law firm, Jim Tory is also one of the seminal figures in building the University of Toronto Law School. He and his twin brother, John, stood first and second in the first class of the modern law school. And from that day forward, they were very closely associated with building the law school. In 1984, we wanted to build a library to honor Bor-Alaskan. I reached out to Jim to co-lead the campaign for the Alaskan Law Library with Lionel Schipper. Jim not only agreed, but was magnificent in bringing his personal credibility and leadership to that campaign. And what was transformative about that effort was it was not just asking individuals to give, it was asking law firms to give. And when Jim said Torys would support the campaign, and he would go to the leaders of other firms and ask those firms to support the campaign, we went from a very, very difficult campaign to an overwhelmingly successful campaign. It was Jim's recognition of how the firms and the profession could support legal education. The chair that the dean holds at the U of T Law School is the James Tory Chair in law, always to be held by the Dean of Law School, capturing that historic relationship of the Torys with the law school that started from its earliest days.
Jim and a couple of others started the Hospital for Sick Children Foundation, and it's now one of the largest foundations in the country with over $700 million in it. But the interesting thing was, when we were doing the deal, a lot of people said you can't just transfer the money from the hospital to the foundation without getting the permission of the people who gave that money. And Jim said, well, if we ask them, it'll take years before we can, because people had died, and how do you get authority? He said, well, transfer the money. If they're angry, we'll give it back to them.
He would speak every year at our annual holiday party. When he would walk up to the podium, the applause was as if the Rolling Stones were walking on stage for a surprise visit.
At holiday parties, there would be long-term service awards, and he would go up on stage and he'd give all the assistants who've worked at the firm for many years big bear hugs.
He would speak, he would be charming, he would be witty, he would be funny. Everybody loved him. And if you had to follow him, it was an awful feeling, because he's a hard act to follow.
People will be sad that he's not able to do this anymore, but it'll still be in our hearts. Every year at the Christmas party, he so sincerely expressed how proud he was of who we were, what we did, what we stood for. And that was all about him. We were standing for him, and will continue to stand for him and all of his values.
He had an innate ability to understand the human condition. He felt the role of the lawyer was not just to tell what is legally permissible, but what is the right thing to do. And that was something that was part of his DNA, it was part of his soul.
His legacy is both apparent and obvious. You see it in the way we work. where people are challenged, where people are supported, people are encouraged to work in teams.
What I'll miss most about Jim Tory is his presence here at Torys, his integrity, his support of the staff, his smile.
He was sweet, he was charming, he was witty, he was very kind, always a pleasure to talk to, always making me laugh.
And all of us who are here today feel responsible as stewards of Jim's legacy in that respect.
We were pals for 50 years and enjoyed each other's company, and that was the essence of the relationship. It wasn't really a lawyer-client relationship at all.
I never had a chance to work with my dad, which I was sorry about. It was just timing that he was not here by the time I got here. But I did have a chance to work with my uncle, and he was so much like my father, and they were so much like each other, but so different. And I say that in the most complimentary way to both of them. And so, when my dad died, he was still here, and you just knew that was that connection to those very special people.
He was a terrific mentor, leader, friend, a father to us all. Wonderful.
I am proud of everyone at Torys. You have kept it as a great place for clients and a wonderful place to work. Torys has been my life and my firm for more than 50 years, and thanks to you, it only gets better and better.